Great. I think we're live. Welcome, everybody, to day two of Investments Decoded. Today's a day filled with everything in detail about angel investing. And before we move on to the art of angel investing in itself, we have a panel for you that will talk about the other perspective, right? The founders taking angel capital to begin with. So, without further ado, let's jump in, and I'll start by introducing some of the most extravagant founders in the ecosystem. I don't think they need much of an introduction, but we have with us Harshil Mathur of Razorpay, Ashwini of Match Street Den, and Sahil Barua of Delhivery. All of the three founders working in three different domains, but with much experience under their belt, trying to create a wave of something which has been unparalleled and impact a lot of lives by adding value. Uh, Through this session, we want to focus a lot about, how founders look at angels to begin with and clarify how the other perspective of it in terms of taking capital comes in. So, hitting the ball running, let's start with the first question as to how all of you, take a look at angel investments to begin with. So, turning back time and understanding when you were raising the initial set of capital for your own startups, how was the journey like? How did you decide whom to approach and why? And what were the factors and variables that went into making that call of taking angel money from a particular founder? Because we've all heard that phrase, founders want capital from founders, but it's important to internalize it and understand from the best of you. So if I may ask Ashwini to get us started, I think that would be fabulous to hear.
Sure. My story is actually one of, especially the angel side of the story, and my seed round is one filled with mistakes, if I had to offer it up. We had just moved back from San Francisco to Madras, and we just started building the business. And a bunch of folks, including Sequoia, kind of found out about the fact that we were getting started, and there was a lot of interest in terms of the fundraise itself. We'd barely even begun the company at that point, and we just had a bunch of folks show up, and it was really really good folks, thankfully, including Xfinity and GrowX, and we just said yes. We had no idea. It was, we were new. We had not lived in India for almost like 15, 20 years. We didn't really have a network. We didn't really have a community. And so it was, I would say, my story of the angel, especially the founder-driven angel story, actually came into my journey in the Series B stage, when I actively went over to Girish and said, "This is ridiculous. Like, I can't believe you're not on my cap table." And so the angel, I spent a good 3 years, I think, building out my network here. And we're talking 2014, 2015, 2016, right? And it's my story of founders becoming a part of, the company building journey actually happened much later in my journey than earlier. And I hope to actively fix that with the community of folks that I work with right now as an angel.
Fair point. I think the mistakes teach us the most, and it's great to have these learnings offer and kick us started for this session. I think further, if I may ask Sahil to go next and talk to us about, how it was back in the day. It's been a long time since Delhivery started, and it's still moving with the same passion and exuberance. What is the role that have some of your angels played in your journey, and how did you go about curating that cap table for yourself when you were getting started, Sahil?
Yeah, so it's been a long time. To be honest, we raised our first round in 2011, and the honest truth is that we didn't curate the angels. We have one angel, and that angel found us, and that was Abhishek Goyal of Traction. The reality is that that was also the first check that Abhishek wrote. So in that sense, it was his first check and our first investment. So neither of us really curated this much. We were starting the company. Abhishek was running Urban Touch at the time, which was an e-commerce company in cosmetics. And he said, logistics is a massive problem for me, and you guys seem to be solving it, and you don't have enough money, so I'd love to give you some money. And we said, sure, you're richer than we are, so we'll take your money. And so Abhishek gave us capital at the time. Look, things were very different in 2011. These days there's a fairly sophisticated process from an angel investing standpoint. In those days, we had no idea. So Abhishek said, what's a good amount for me to invest? We said, we have no idea, but to be honest, at the time, 10 lakhs sounds like a lot. So why don't you give us 10 lakhs? And we had it was just a punt, and he gave us the money, and we didn't even discuss valuation or anything of the sort. He just said, "I'll give you this money," and we said, "Sure, we take it." And that's really our story. We didn't curate the angel; the angel found us. And to be honest, how has Abhishek been helpful? Abhishek's been a great supporter every step of the way. He was an experienced VC. Before that, he was an entrepreneur himself. He's helped us with hiring. He's helped us with capital raising. He's connected us to customers over the years. He's just been a great sort of support to delivery throughout. But I will point out our experience is perhaps somewhat unusual as startups go.
Fair enough. No, a point well taken and a story for the record, I'm sure. It's important to note that, sometimes these coincidences, serendipity as they call it, actually lead to a lot. But moving from there to Harshil. Harshil, your story will also be very interesting. As a, somebody who'd gone out of college, you faced a ton of rejection early on from the banks, as you've spoken about in the past. But how was your rejection or not rejection with the capital side of things? Like, did you have to toil extremely hard? Did you have particular people in mind that you wanted to raise capital from? How was your angel journey? I think that would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, our angel journey was pretty smooth actually, right? So initially, when we started building Razorpay, we were building out of Jaipur, we were building in payments, and we started approaching institutional VCs. And earlier, we got a lot of rejections from institutional VCs as well because they were like, "Hey, there are too many players in this space. What are you going here?" So we refocused our energy on angels, and we started raising. We were in YC, so we raised from a couple of angels in US, and parallelly started raising from Indian angels. And we found that it was much easier to convince angels than institutional VCs because founders understood what we were trying to do. Most founders had built companies which needed payments at some point of time, so they exactly understood what challenges founders face when they are starting up and when they want to set up payments. Because all of them said, "Hey, I have my own horror stories of setting up payments," and because of that, it was very relatable for them. So we ended up raising from a lot of angels. We raised from almost 33 plus angels in our seed round. Including some of the founders like Kunal Shah, Kunal Bell, and a lot of founders in India. We even raised from a lot of US founders, like Justin Can, the founder of Twitch, the founder of Scriptd, and a lot of folks. It also included some non-founders and operator angels, which has actually been also very helpful. So yeah, we didn't start with a strategy that we want to raise from these many angels. We started talking to people and raising small checks. And the checks range from anywhere from 10K USD to 200K USD, right? So different angels have different sort of commitments, but in any case, like it didn't matter what kind of check size he came with, as long as it was meaningful and we felt that the angel could help us. So I think over the years, out of the 30 angels, there are angels who have been very, very helpful, like people like Kunal Shah, who I still call up almost before every funding round to just seek his advice. And there are some angels who have never spoken to after I raised the first round of funding, right? So it is all the way. But one thing is that is good about like you can't manage 33 institutional investors, but managing 33 angels is actually very smooth. And a lot of people have asked this a couple of times that how do you manage 33 shareholders? But most angels don't really push you on anything. Like they don't even ask questions, right? So you raise from them, they are sitting on a cap table. If you want help, you can reach out to them. But if you don't do anything, they rarely ever ask and trouble me, ask for updates and stuff. It's completely up to us whether what updates you want to share. Sometimes they'll reach out and ask, "Hey, what is the price of the shares I hold now?" But that is it, right? So yeah, I think from that perspective, I think our experience with angel investing has been really, really good.
Fair enough. Great. I think I love the diversity which is prevalent throughout the panel. And we've heard three different perspectives to how to get started with the founder journey and think about angel capital. But turning the tide to, a comparison of sorts and to not stereotype in any manner. But you've all seen a ton of institutional capital as well as angel capital and have now been on the other side as well, cutting checks yourself, right? So when we talk about the essence of capital in itself, how important of a role does the angel capital play in terms of value and the capital, as opposed to how institutions play a role in your journey, having supporting you throughout your journey? So I think Harshil touched upon help, and since you gave us that last answer, it'll be great to start this one with you if you have something to add here.
Yeah, see, institutional capital is more about money first and advice second, right? Like you want to find a fit of visions and fit of alignment, but in the end, institutional capital is primarily about money, right? You want to raise $10 million, so you want an investor who's willing to commit that, and at the same time you want some alignment of interest. I think angel investment, generally the checks are small, so it is less about the money, more about the advice first, right? So you're trying to get an investor who can be helpful to you in the journey in some shape or form. Like as I said, like some of the most helpful angels that came into that round have put in the smallest checks, like they put like 10K USDF check, but they have been extremely helpful, right? Like that 10K is worth a lot more than some of the angels who put, let's say, 200K, because the help that I got from that is worth a lot more, right? And 10K, like in most early startup journey, right? 10K doesn't really make much of a difference in the end, because if you're raising like together we raised $2.5 million, right, from angels. So 10K didn't really have much of a delta in terms of money, but the advice that some of these angels could bring in for us was very helpful. For us, it was also lot different because we were in B2B. So some of these founders could really help us connect with other companies in their portfolio, with other founders that they were connected with. So the kind of early help that we got from them, not just in terms of advice, but in terms of direct customer acquisition, was very helpful. And that's why I said like the check didn't really matter. Like if some of them had put even smaller check, I would have just taken that money in, because the help I could get from these angels was worth a lot more.
Fair enough. Thanks for that, Harshil. I think, you talk about the help, and that's another extremely important part. Moving to Ashwini, I think, next, and talking about the same pointers, except that putting into context the help side of it as well, right? So now that you are curating your angel portfolio, angel cap table even more intricately, is there anything specific that you're looking out for in the angels? Are they supposed to be domain experts, given that you're working in a particular niche, or is it something that you look for in general experience, or these are some of the factors? So if you could touch upon that while giving us context to the last question, I think that would be phenomenal.
No, I second everything Harshil said, right? At the end of the day, I think the angel network is really one about the network itself, right? And I think, if I had to categorize the types of help and the types of kind of criteria, for a lack of a better way to put it, one, you use this angel network typically for as an emergency call in some ways, right? Like it's so hard to get through this journey to begin with, right? And one day it's up, one day it's down, the next day is sideways, right? And so I think it's really important to have a network, whether it's of peers, whether it's of, other angels, whether it's of, to be able to have that ability to pick up that phone and call is a really important one. And I know that, a lot of times is very city centric. I can tell you here in Chennai, for example, there's a bunch of us that go out and, we do Pongal over Saturdays, right? Or and we've got a very specific set of rituals to kind of get together and bitch and moan about it and, talk about our own kind of. So I think network is really important. And I think angels really are fantastic, especially if they're founders themselves. That's one. I think the second part of it is opening doors, and the opening doors could be either in the form of exactly what Harshil said, right, which is customers, right? Somebody who knows someone who knows someone else, right? I think that's one kind of approach over there in terms of customer acquisition. And then the other side of it is from an investor perspective, right? Like, I mean, it's really important. People want introductions, right? And a founder introduction to someone is valued 10x more than, like a cold message to someone. So, I routinely find myself doing this, but also, leaning on a lot of other angels to do this, right? So getting to know people through the network, I think, is a really important one. And then last one, I think, is org building. This is one that I think, I'll talk about when I talk about my own experience as an angel a little bit more. But I find that org building, who should I hire? Where should I hire them from? What should I be doing next at this stage of the company, right? And people who have just gone through this just before you, right, end up becoming really valuable. And you don't have to do that all over again. I can tell you again from the mistakes that I did, in the early part of Math Street Den's journey, like I couldn't go to anyone for enterprise-based AI tech. People were like, what the hell are you talking about, right? So it was very difficult to find kind of a peer community to go, say one, enterprise selling from India, and two, like deep tech and computer vision from India. People were like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And today, of course, that's very different, right? A lot of people are investing in this, and it's wonderful to have that network today, but it was not the same back then. And I think whether it's org building, product roadmap, who to hire, that becomes a really important part of what, angels really typically bring to the table.
Great. I think that's wonderful to hear, given that, you talk about the shared experiences, and given that angels have been through the same journey, if not similar in so many circumstances. It's really valuable, as you mentioned. Phenomenal to hear that. And as we turn to Sahil, I think there's an interesting question asked by Rahul Seth, who asks regarding, what constitutes as help to begin with, and if you can perhaps point out specific instances that you, either from the other side, given that you're an active angel in some of the other companies yourself, and that angels have played in your company building journey have played, I think that would be great things to reflect upon.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a bit. I think, again, we have a very different experience of angel investing, both in terms of having angel investors on board and having invested a little bit. I actually think institutional capital is far more important, because if a business doesn't outgrow its angel investors, that's a really bad sign. So angels actually have very limited use at all. And apart from that, I think there's a broader point in terms of help. Founders will help founders, or founders should help founders, irrespective of whether they're on someone's cap table. I don't think angel investing is the necessary way to get hold of people to help you build a business. In terms of how Abhishek's been helpful to us, and I keep going back to that, I can only say Abhishek because literally we have one investor, one angel investor. The biggest help that he's been to us is, at that point in time, just introducing us to clients. In a B2B environment, it matters a lot, like Harshil pointed out, right? And so at an early stage, I can imagine that having the right set of angels in a B2B environment is super useful. So Abhishek introduced us to Sachin and Binny at Flipkart. We had a long conversation about how to build logistics at that point. And interestingly, eCart was starting at the same time, so we were sort of struggling through the same thing. From my standpoint, it's not like I'm a super active angel investor, and my approach usually is to find a business that I like, ask them if I can put in some money, and if I can, that's great. And then hopefully they never have to call me again, because I believe it. I don't think I know enough about any of the businesses that any of these founders are running to be particularly helpful. Where we are helpful is very, very clear and very, very focused. Where founders run into operational problems that we've seen before, which could sometimes, for example, in COVID, it was as simple as a couple of companies calling up and saying, "Hey, we're not able to coordinate with the local authorities to get our stuff delivered. Can you make it happen?" So sure, we can make it happen. And frankly, we would have done that irrespective of whether we'd been on the cap table or not. That doesn't matter at all. But those are the areas that, or sometimes a funder will just call for a ref check on a fund. We have a bunch of institutional investors. Somebody's raising a round from a Tiger or from a SoftBank or someone, and call up and say, "Hey, what do you think?" But again, these are conversations that happen irrespective. So my view on angel investing is simply, it's good for the angel. Companies can do without it, especially beyond the point. It's a bit, especially. So let me stop there before I incriminate. That's.
No, we'd love that. I think an opposing perspective makes the discussion even better. But jumping from there, and touching upon how exactly and how much time, as perhaps you as an angel investor, should spend beyond your company building exercise in helping founders, right? So quantifying and restricting in terms of time, simply because that's the commodity I'm guessing is most important to founders. So if you can perhaps touch upon, how that works, because we had a panel yesterday who mentioned that angels are the shoulder to cry on. If not being that dramatic, they're the people you call to when you have bad news to give, right? You're not going to call your institutional capital for it. So Harshil, if you want to start us and talk to us about how much time do you spend as an angel investor, at what point in your company building journey did you start thinking of helping founders formally as well? I think those would be wonderful pointers to touch upon. Harshil, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, that happens at least once in every call. So yeah, at the start, as I said, like, we raised money from a bunch of angel investors. Some of them were very helpful to us. As we went through our journey, at a certain point of time, I was interacting and helping a lot of startups. I think I just want to add one thing to what Sahil said. Like, I think most founders would help out companies anyway. And most founders I have interacted with, some of them who have never angel invested, would do. I think it's more for founders' comfort that I feel a lot more comfortable calling out my angel investors, because I know I have that, I kind of have that command over them that, like, hey, I can call you even at 12 a.m. in the night. For founders who are not invested in us, I have to think twice. Like, should I reach out to him? Will this guy be busy? Will he help me? Will he help me out a lot, or will he think of me as a nuisance? Versus my own angels, where I feel like I kind of have the right over them, that I can call them up even at 12. Some of them, I have that much of a relationship that I can ping them at 2 a.m. in the night and ask them, hey, I'm closing this round and I'm thinking of these structures. Do you think this makes sense? So So that is the only advantage. Otherwise, like from a founder's perspective, most founders have been very, very helpful. So going back to the point that you were saying, like in terms of time, that there's no specific definition of it. As I said, like there are companies that where I have invested, where they have never called me. They have set up like once or twice. They have had a general chat, but they have really never called me, and it's a good thing. Like it's completely up to the founders, right? But there are companies who call up a lot of times and like are going through really, really terrible situations, especially during COVID, who are calling up a lot of times and trying to understand how do they navigate. Some of them are going through salary cuts, pay cuts, all of those things. Some of them are actually shutting down, right? So in those cases, the founders reach out a lot more. So it is a mixed bag. I think in my own journey as well as my own angel investment journey, I've seen that it is completely up to the founder, right? From my own angels as well, the angels I have troubled a lot more times. There are angels I have reached out once or twice. And it depends on what kind of problems I'm facing, right? Like different angels can have for different things. It also depends on the kind of relationship built. But I think from most angels, I've never heard an angel come back and say, "Hey, you're taking too much of my time," right? Like the angels are generally available, and as long as it's a fine balance, and the founders themselves are also very busy. They don't want to keep spending time with you. They are all focused on building their companies. So they reach out only when they really, really need help. And in those times, nobody ever says no.
Fair point, fair point. So time not being such a huge consideration because things usually flow. And I love the fact that the panel comprehensively agrees on the fact that the community at large is so helpful in general that it's not important to invest to actually help. And the value add that we keep hearing about on Twitter is something that goes without saying. So I think that's a wonderful takeaway. But Ashwini, do you have anything specific to add in terms of, given that you're still, building out the company that you want to in the next decade, when do you think as a founder did you start pondering upon helping other founders dedicatedly, cutting checks into companies and also dedicating a part of your time, even if it's 1% from your company building journey, to angel investments?
Again, it wasn't a conscious choice. It wasn't like me getting up one day and saying, okay, today I'll be an angel investor. No, it wasn't that at all. I think it's just, very spontaneous. You become a part of the network. You're talking to people. You're hanging out with people pretty much, every day in some form. And, for me, I think my angel journey in some ways, I would argue, is very driven by the challenges that I faced myself. I prefer investing in very, very specific types of companies. I invest in deep tech. That's like a very specific kind of focus for me, because I still think that India is, a while away from, valuing deep tech to begin with as an investment, as an entity. And I think, it's really important for me to play that role there to kind of encourage people. It's not and you don't find too many investors, right? And this is why I think, on the institutional side, there are a handful of investors. I see Arundhati here. Xfinity was one of the first ones to show up at our doorstep to say, like, deep tech, that's my thesis. And for us, it was like, what? Like a VC in India who has a thesis about deep tech is like, very rare to come across that, right? And I think, for me, that is a big driver for why I'm an angel. The second side of course, is going to be a bit of a cliche here, but, we need more women founders. I invest pretty extensively in women who found companies. I recently invested in one that is all about, feminine healthcare, right? And related issues. And that's a big one for me. So my angel investments are very thesis driven, and very driven by my own challenges that I faced starting up this company. That said, though, I do want to echo the sentiment here that regardless of whether you're an investor or not, you have networks, right? And you are constantly providing each other support in some form or the other. Being an angel does give you that ticket to kind of, call someone or to be available when someone wants you. And if I had to kind of describe how I'm available to some of the folks that have taken, money in some way from me, for me, it's, there are folks exactly in the categories that, Harshil also mentioned. There are folks that actually set up 30 minutes with me every month, and it's ridiculous sometimes. Like I don't think I've met any angel of mine in that kind of frequency ever. But again, it comes down to the fact that the challenges of building deep tech in India from India is really different, right? So how should I be thinking about this? I'm facing this. There's nobody to talk to. So I feel like the community there is lacking in some ways. So the need for whoever you can find is that much stronger, for a lack of a better way to put it. And so there are people like that, and then there are people who are and the advice there is typically organization, hiring, like, this investor is talking to me, what should I do? Like, nobody's listening to me, nobody gets what I'm trying to say from like I mentioned this, but then, how do I answer these questions? So I do think that most of the space that I am in is very specifically revolving around the idea of scarcity to access to help. And so I think this is why this for me, it's very driven by that, my angel investment thesis.
Right, right. I think that's a perfect testament to how the ecosystem in general is as well, so supportive, connected, and helpful in general. But wonderful to hear that, you're taking out time to go out of your way to actually support the community at large and grow the ecosystem at a place which requires the growth. So thanks for that answer, Ashwini. Moving to Sahil and, asking him about one observation from the panel that I can take away is that there's no set process to, let's say, the organic nature of angel investments, especially as a founder, given that it's an extension of the support and help, right? However, Sahil, given that you've built a legendary company, which I'm sure is going to go ahead like the other founders on the panel, but I'm sure you're categorized as one of those star angels, as we call it, right, in the ecosystem, and most folks would like to have you on their cap table. So is there any method that goes into this madness for you before taking a calculated decision as to how and when to invest in a founder, if at all? So if you'd have anything to add there, I think it would be great for everybody to hear.
Yeah, so I'm decidedly not a star angel or whatever that means. I can assure you that that's not the case. Two things. I'm just thinking through the few angel investments that I've made. There are only a couple of things which are common. One is either I've known the founders well, or they've been very strongly referred by somebody who I know. The second is that I can understand the business reasonably quickly. So, for example, I don't do consumer investments because I simply don't understand them at all. So, I think for us, if it's a B2B investment, for example, if it's something where I can see how this business makes money or lists or exits at some point in time, then it's worth investing in. And I think I should actually correct something I said earlier, because I think Ashwini raised a very, very valid point. I think the other thing is where there are really big blank spaces from a VC standpoint. When you think about deep tech or you think about healthcare, for example, these are two areas that just don't get invested in enough. And actually that's a very valid point, that angels have a much bigger role to play than otherwise. I hadn't thought about that. There I haven't actually invested in any companies per se. I'd love to. I'd imagine that would be part of the method. Simply because I think those are areas that VCs won't invest in. So one is, from an investment standpoint, it's good to be contrarian in that sense. I believe it will get capital at some point, and so there are returns to be made there. But B, also, I think it's just a question of, these are exciting spaces to be in where nobody else will. And there it's more a question of the excitement of seeing the evolution of the company. So I'm just thinking through it. For example, I've done Abhishek invested in our company. I invested in Abhishek's company. Other than that, I've done some investments. For example, I invested in Pankaj Chadda's company and in a couple of others, where Anshu and Bridge, where they run Magic Pin. So these are just places where I know the founders, or the founders are strongly recommended. Like I said, I can understand the idea. I can see how it exits. I think that's an important consideration that angels don't take into account. Otherwise, the problem is angel capital is extremely illiquid. I don't agree with the adage that, angel investors, the approach should be you put in the money and assume you've lost it. That's just really bad investing. So my approach is, can I see that this business is going to scale up, become large, and provide an exit, or is someone going to buy it? And those are potentially areas where I'm useful as well. At some point, if you wish to sell the company to someone, there's a possibility that some introduction might help. So that's the method. But I just want to point out, angel investing is so new in India, and there are so few deals that have seen any sort of value creation in 10 years, that everything we're saying here should be taken with a gigantic pinch of salt. I mean, none of this is gospel truth.
Fair enough. I think that follows the norm for all of the other sessions as well, and completely appreciate the contrarian perspective, because forget about your money once you've invested. It is a quote that was brought up yesterday at a panel as well, and it's great to see that there's an opposing viewpoint as well, because none of it is, as you said, the gospel of truth. It has to be taken with your own consideration. These are all learnings which we're all sharing, and in fact, thanks for all of that. But that's a great segue to also understand from the other panelists' perspective perspective as to what goes into taking a decision, right? And since Ashwini mentioned that she's in a basic ecosystem which is still evolving in nature, I'd love to hear from you as to, what are some of the parallels that you draw from your own journey, and what is it that goes into your sort of consideration before putting in that check, if at all?
I think, we're obviously looking for the same things like any investor. And I do want to, reiterate what Sahil said, right? For me, at the end of the day, I ask myself, I started investing about 18 to 24 months ago, roughly about a year and a half-ish to 2 years ago. And I keep asking myself, will my maid's children be more, at the receiving end of a better thing if I gave this money to them and get them through school rather than investing it in a company? And I ask myself that question all the time, right? Should I pay, the schooling for my driver's kids? Should I pay, so there are lots of questions to be asked as an angel. And so this whole angel thing, I mean, I think, it's the new thing. Like everybody wants to be in, and I think we need a lot more angels. Like there's no doubt about that. There's 100% that we're just at the beginning of this cycle. And I think value creation and ability to make more money, no matter who you are, is extremely important. But for me, in terms of considering who I end up going with versus not going with, a couple of things. One, it's really important to be a part of the right networks as an angel. The deals are always happening. It's like anything else, right? Like it's exactly like investment banking. If you're a part of the creme de la creme of the investment, you're going to get all the top investments. If you're not part of that, you're not going to get those investments, right? So there is a hierarchy there. There is a pecking order there, even in the angel system. And so it's all about being a part of multiple different types of, networks as an angel. That's the first thing. For me, I have picked and chosen the kind of networks that I want to be in, and the ones where I believe that I will get the maximum deal flow for deep tech and for women-focused businesses are the two places where you'll find me the most. There will be times when I invest in the B2B side of things, but again, it has to be somehow related to infra, right? It has to be infra or hardcore tech-driven B2B. Like, so I'm very clear. I generally don't, do widely beyond that. If I do, it's because I strongly believe it has to relate to me in some form. My investment thesis is very driven by my own experiences. And like I said, if I believe I can take that money and give it to someone immediately and put a kid through school, or give someone, money who can get out of hospital or something like that, I'd rather put that money there than put it into, than invest it into a startup, right? So it's really important to kind of think through what those trade-offs really are at the end of the day. And for me, it is about relating to scarce spaces in the industry right now, and hoping that, that all of that is going to change.
Wow, I think that's wonderful to hear. I think very conscious and very evident. I think that's been brought up for the first time through the summit, and important to note that it's not the asset class where you can just keep putting money in. Those conscious decisions have to be put in, and I love the thought process of how you've evolved. Thanks for pondering upon that. Turning to Harshil with somewhat the same question, but also bringing the point that you're considerably the young founder on the panel, right? But you've scaled so fast quickly, and there's been exponential growth, right? Stereotyping for the reason, because I want to touch upon the fact that when we talk about angel investments, it's also been spoken in terms of shared value, right? So it's not just a one-way street. It's not like you're just providing to the cap table of the company and you're not learning anything, but it's shared, right? So according to your experiences, do you factor in any of the shared experiences thing going into a cap table? Is it a consideration that maybe I'm going to learn from this founder going ahead as well? And how much of that factors into your decision before making an investment?
No, thanks for bringing that out. I think, also, I think I have started angel investing less than 12 months ago, so I'm still fairly early. I've done like 5-6 deals yet, so still fairly early. But I've started doing it a lot more in the last 6 to 12 months. I think I focus on particular segments like B2B, which I understand very well. Fintech in particular, because those are segments where I can add a lot of value. But you're right. Like my primary purpose of angel investment is, I think it comes from a selfish motive of learning a lot. I think from financial return perspective, angel investment is not really that great of an instrument. Like there are better and more predictable and more liquid instruments. Angel investment, you do it, like you don't know when you'll see the return. But from a learning perspective, I really love doing angel investment a lot, because as a company scales and as you're too busy in your own company, it's very hard to keep up with what's happening in the ecosystem, right? And angel investment brings that value a lot, because Like for example, I speak with at least 2 or 3 companies every week now, and the kind of learning that I can get from just speaking to them, whether I make investment or not, just knowing what's happening in the system, what are the new trends happening, where are people going, I think that brings a lot of value for me personally, right? Like I am able to keep myself really updated on what's moving in the ecosystem much faster than anything else. Like reading news articles and reading Twitter feeds and everything else is a much worse way of getting that same information, because it's generally too late. Like by the time you hear that this trend is catching on, like there are already 10 companies in that space. But when you do angel investment, you hear of like 2 or 3 companies which are taking a contrarian view, going in a very different direction. And I think that is personally very exciting for me. So yeah, you're right. Like it is definitely a two-way street for angel investors in particular. I think it's a great way to learn what's happening in the ecosystem, what's driving. I think financial return is generally the lower reason for doing it, because you'd never know. And as Sahil said, as an ecosystem, we haven't seen too many great exits. So it's still a little early to bet on that asset class. But for most founders, I think the kind of learning you can get out of it is really amazing.
Right, right. Wonderful to hear. I think, echoing the fact that the shared value actually makes a difference, and get to know that, it's such an evolving journey and the different perspectives on the table are fantastic. As we move to the closings of the journey, and it's been wonderful in terms of the panel, I request everybody to, perhaps put in their last questions, anything in specific you want me to direct towards any particular founder. But as we close down, it would be interesting to, hear final thoughts on given that every one of you has the benefit of hindsight now, if you had to perhaps, if not go back in time, construct cap tables in a way to be able to manage not just angel capital, institutional capital as well, and keep a big mix of not just founder angel capital, but an area of domain expertise as well, have CXOs on board, reach out to folks who can be more helpful and ponder upon the specific help. I know we've been through this in bits and pieces, but as we close down, it would be a great segue for the next session, which is the art of angel investing, where all the folks attending the summit in general can learn from your experiences as to what the addition of value truly means, and how coming from different personas can you truly contribute to the cap table with the capital that comes along with it. So I request Sahil to perhaps get us kick-started with that and include any final pointers that you might want to leave us after the session.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would necessarily construct our cap table any differently. I think the one thing that we're trying to do now, and that's perhaps the only best answer I can provide. What we're trying to do now is to see, as we're in the process of going public, to really see if there are some people we want to bring in who invest in the company now. So we're actually bringing in angels at whatever series, some letter beyond F, right? So it's actually a very different way to look at it. We didn't have angels in the beginning. I think Delhivery is a business which requires a large amount of capital. And so for us, institutional capital made sense. That's not necessarily true for every other kind of business. We are bringing in angels now. So maybe we're fundraising in reverse in some ways. And so I think for us now, what's interesting is, as a large business, bringing in a group of people who support delivery, high quality individuals. So for example, Harsh from Dream 11 just came in and invested in delivery. We'd love to have people like that who are running large businesses themselves or in similar situations as us, are generally viewed as having sophisticated judgment of business. That's possibly how I would think about constructing our cap table. As general advice, my view is, if you're in the kind of business where it's a white space and VCs don't invest, raise angel capital, raise it from founders who are in that space and are successful. Makes a lot of sense. If you're in a B2B environment, certainly raise angel capital from people who might be your customers, assuming that there's no ethical boundary being crossed, obviously. It makes a lot of sense. Expect to get introductions, but plan to outgrow your angels. That's the way I would put it. Very quickly.
Wonderful. No, thanks for that. I think, one thing that Sahil has definitely echoed is outgrow your angels and be very careful of the value add that they're adding, and not stress on details that may not be too important. So to sum that up, moving to, I think, Harshil next, and then we can end with Ashwini. But Harshil, if you want to add anything in terms of general advice, reconstructing your cap table, if at all, or giving the benefit of hindsight, what are things you would look for, and how would you particularly distinguish between the angel capital and institutional capital? Interestingly enough, just to add, one of the members from the audience, Rishi, has pointed out that if some of you can provide no-nos in an angel investor as well, I think that would be wonderful to hear. So Harshil, if you want to touch upon something.
Yeah. So I think looking back at my cap table, I think the most helpful investors, if I do rate it in a priority order, I think most helpful investors were founders themselves, right? Because they're generally the least intrusive, because they know like how a founder's life is, how you are always busy in so many things. But they're also most helpful because they know that when you need help, you really need help, right? Like and second would be operators, like in early stage startups, right? We raised money from few people who were not founders, but like first engineer in a company or first PM in a particular company in US, and those have been the second most helpful because we could take operational advice. I think the least helpful investors for us were senior executives in really large companies, because it's very like it sounds good, and a lot of founders I speak to feel that, hey, I want to take money from this senior executive in this company and stuff. Generally, it's very hard to have that context of a founder, right? Like, so when you go to advice for them, the kind of advice they bring from that corporate environment, it's very hard to force fit. Again, there could be exceptions to that. I'm not saying not every corporate executive would be wrong, but it's very hard to generally force fit that. So if people come from non-startup world, so that would be that has been my experience. Coming to red flags, I think one simple red flag that I see is that if an angel investor is investing in you for the purpose of financial return, don't take it, because you will most likely disappoint that investor. Like as I said, angel investment is a very risky asset class. It's very low chance of success. So if somebody is investing in the hopes that he'll turn in his X amount of money into 10x or 100x, just be careful of that, because it's very unlikely, and you should honestly tell people. I tell people who are starting angel investment that, hey, invest money that you're willing to lose, because it's a very risky asset class. Like, so people should know that. I think that is one single red flag that I will call out.
Wonderful. I think that's very pertinent and very helpful to everybody. Ashwini, giving the ball in your hand, on your court, to ensure that we end with a great note.
I think two things come to mind. One, I think there are a lot of folks on social who are constantly, there's this need to come across as the expert, right? The more the people find their place in the community, in a really fast growing community like the Indian startup community. And I think there is a lot of noise out there, right? I would say as a founder, it's important to know the difference between what is noise and what is not. And so be really careful about which angels you end up picking. I think is going to be kind of the first kind of, advice, right? And I think having some kind of a framework is generally helpful, and then being very disciplined about sticking to that framework when you're looking to bring an angel on board. I think both of them said, there will be people who are helping you regardless of whether or not they're putting the money in your company, right? Take money from those people. Right, that's a great framework, and that's a great kind of rule to have. If this person's going to help you even without the money, they're going to be that much more helpful with the money, or maybe not, but that's the kind of person you need money from, right? So I think that's one kind of filter. Another filter is just looking at it from a perspective of someone in your domain who's gone through something like that before. I think is generally very helpful. Third, someone who's very connected, but at the same time will clearly use those connections in some meaningful way, right? Which means they should have demonstrated that in some form to you to begin with. And I think looking and having some kind of a framework like this is generally very helpful. And it's one that, like Sahil said, we're also, our real angels, like in terms of individual people, really started, that journey just started at Series B. And I don't expect that to change moving forward either. So it's never too late. It's all about adding people who can add value in your journey to your cap table, right? And if they will do that even without joining your cap table, even better, right? So just making sure you have some kind of a framework there and being very disciplined about it and not slipping, right? Because I think sometimes people tend to come across as being super helpful, and it might not always be the case. I can tell you that I've made a lot of those mistakes myself. And since you did bring up age, I quickly went to LinkedIn and looked up Harshil and Sahil. And officially, clearly there's only one 40-year-old on this panel. So I can tell you that I've definitely gone through a lot of duping and making a lot more wrong choices than likely both of them. So a lot of my kind of suggestions in some way come from the fact that that there is a lot of noise out there. There is a lot, cut through that and have someone who can help you cut through that to make the right.
For sure. The age was just a sidebar. I hope that's not too much of a botheration. But this has been absolutely fantastic. I think I would like to really thank Ashwini, Harshil, and Sahil for this phenomenal panel. I think one thing that has been a definite takeaway is that help and value are not, of course, mutually exclusive and don't essentially come with capital. In the ecosystem that we are in, it's genuinely good to be genuinely helpful. And I think that's very evident from all of what you said. And the fact that angel investing need not be taken as genuinely or candidly as it usually does. You've clarified that it is a conscious decision. It is a risky asset class and it needs to be considered. And there are a lot of factors that weigh in before making that decision. I think this has been phenomenal. Thanks once again from the entire team at Investments Decoded. We have another session beginning in the next 2 minutes. Thanks again for everybody attending and the panels, especially for being on.